Hi, I'm Ed Jaffe, and welcome back to JaffeWoodwinds.com and the Woodwind Legacy Series. This afternoon, I'm interviewing an old friend, a mentor, and someone who I have the greatest respect for as a musician and as a teacher. Bob Mover has been a major force in the industry for many, many years, and I'm so glad we had the opportunity today to spend time with Bob and get some insights into his career, but also having him spread some insights as to how he goes about teaching creative jazz improvisation. And so, Bob, thanks so much for coming up here today, man.
Thank you, Ed. My pleasure.
I'm so glad we have this opportunity to spend and share with our viewers. You've had a long career and you've played with virtually everybody. But before we get into those details, let's talk a little bit about how you got involved in music, playing the saxophone, and coming out of Boston, how that all transpired.
Okay, well, I was born into a musical family. My father was a trumpet player who had played with Tommy Dorsey and Jerry Wald's big band, and
Charlie Spivak, I think, as
Charlie
well.
Spivak,
Right, I remember.
And he played like a Spivak kind of style, But when he played jazz, he played a little bit more like Charlie Shavers, because he had been on the band with Charlie Shavers on Dorsey's band.
I see.
In fact, when my mother was pregnant with me, I got a couple of presents. One from Charlie Shavers, I got this plaid Kangol Bebop cap, that they used to call a Bebop cap, with a matching plaid bow tie. Somehow he said, "I know it's going to be a boy, and here, this is for the kid." And
so you had no choice.
I had no choice. Right? Believe me, well, if I had been a good athlete, I might have wanted to do that. But other than that, I was really inept at sports. But I loved sports, but I was terrible at them. But my dad was funny about that, because he explained to me that Lou Gehrig was not a natural the way Babe Ruth was, but still through his sheer will and desire became a great baseball player. But my father said, there might be some things that, you're more natural at, like you may be a natural musician, because he could tell from the time I was 3 or 4 years old, I was always at the piano.
Right.
And when they took me to the movies, I remember when I was about 6 years old, we saw Can with Sinatra, and I think it was Shirley MacLaine, Juliet Prowse, somebody. And I came back and remembered "You Do Something to Me," and kind of played it on the piano, in the key of C. I played everything in the key of C. And we saw Over the Rainbow. I remembered we just, they didn't have VCRs and that kind of thing. You couldn't see it over and over.
Right.
But when we saw The Wizard of Oz, I kind of remembered Over the Rainbow, much of it.
Right.
And if I only had a brain, and I went to the piano, and I remember figuring those things out.
Right.
And enjoying figuring things out as a kid on the piano.
Right.
Discovering the first black note on the middle of the bridge of Over the Rainbow.
Yeah, right. The diminished, yeah.
And my dad had been, he had a band at the Salisbury Beach Frolics in Boston as well, which was a resort town. And Billy Eckstein had come in. They played for the different singers that came in. And my dad got a really good band in Boston for that particular thing. He told me he had like Dick Twardzik on piano, he had Charlie Mariano, he had Herb Pomeroy, Joe Gordon.
Top guys.
Integrated band,
Yeah.
And Billy Eckstein liked the band so much, he said, no, that book hadn't been played as well since he'd had the band. And he wanted my father to become his musical director. But my dad turned him down because my mother was pregnant with me, and he didn't want to leave town. And I have an electric train. I don't have it anymore, but there's a picture of my father, my mother, me in my mother's belly, and an electric train that Billy Eckstein got me when I was born.
Wow.
So I grew up with that kind of thing.
Yeah, so you had a lot of music in the household, and you were surrounded by it from the time you were born.
Yeah, and they gave me piano. My dad also played the theremin, and he was on the Ernie Kovacs show with the theremin. He played some of that.
Really?
Yeah. There's a Twilight Zone bit where you hear the satire on the Twilight Zone, and my dad is playing the theremin on that. You can hear that. So he did that, and he was in New York, and he knew. He got out of music and became a salesman, and the rest of the story is pretty tragic, but we won't go into that.
Yeah. Well, how did you come to the saxophone?
I came to the saxophone because first I was playing the piano, but I was born with what is called gross motor difficulty. So it made it very hard. It made it very hard for me to play contrary motion, for example. I was not coordinated. That's why I was talking about, wanting to be an athlete and being really bad at it.
Yeah.
I had this motor difficulty problem.
The good thing, today you'd probably get a big contract from the Knicks. The way
I don't know.
the way they're going.
Yeah, well, maybe.
So obviously, counterpoint on the piano would have been
It was hard.
Yeah.
But I liked Bach, and I had a teacher named Al Vega, who was a very good musician in Boston, played around Boston for years, a jazz pianist. Jazz cocktail kind of style, but good. And he got me into Bach. He got me into even the story of Bach, how he had all these children and all those things. So I like playing Bach one line at a time, one hand at a time. I got into doing that a little bit, playing the inventions, but I couldn't put them together.
Got it.
I was very frustrated. So then I got into trumpet to try to play like my father. And my father was a terrible teacher, had absolutely no patience.
Well, it's very hard to study with a parent, any instrument.
It may be, but even, I don't think, maybe he never taught anybody else, but if I got something wrong twice, it was maybe all right. If I got it wrong the third time, he didn't talk to me. Told me I just had no talent. I was absolutely useless, worthless, and wouldn't have dinner with me even. Would say, I'll eat when he's through. That kind of thing,
Wow.
Like he was nasty at times.
Yeah, so you had to find another instrument.
Yeah, definitely. But even then, I went to guitar. And after that, after piano, I went to guitar, after trumpet. And I was about 9, 10 years old now on guitar. And we would play C-Jam blues, and I would play blues changes. And if I messed up, he'd get mad at me too, so.
Right.
That was it. But I had a best friend named Harold Butler, who was this is how I came about to jazz, who was the same, 1 year older than me, one year ahead of me in school. And Harold played guitar too. And we both wore these duck's ass haircuts, in the back, like and wore leather jackets. And we would pretend to be the Everly Brothers. And we sang all of those things in perfect harmony. We had on all the Buddy Holly tunes and also Little Richard. We did that stuff, and Chuck Berry. And we were really rock and rollers, And we had that stuff down. And we were pretty good for 10 and 11-year-olds. But when I was 12, I moved to, or 11, the end of my 11th year, I moved to Florida. We moved away from Swampscott, Massachusetts, which is where I grew up. It's outside of Boston, about 20 miles north of Boston. And it's a nice, fairly affluent town and everything. But then we moved to Florida. We lost our money. My parents got divorced. Life changed considerably. And probably for that reason, I learned to play. I can play with some soul. Anyway, when I moved to Florida, my friend Harold, who was, he was an adopted kid, and we even looked alike. He was in Massachusetts. He was about to come down and visit me, and he was killed. He was hit by a car.
Jesus.
And at that point, I couldn't listen to rock and roll anymore without being like totally losing it and being very sad and crying. And I couldn't play the guitar anymore. I just couldn't. Everything reminded me of,
This
Harold.
friend, yeah.
Because I idolized this kid too. He was everything I wasn't. He was a real daredevil. I mean, he climbed the highest tree, and he'd do this. He fell out of a tree. He'd break something every year, but it didn't stop him. He was, and I was a natural coward. I had this Jewish little trepidation for things my grandmother told me. My grandmother said, "No, you don't do that.
Right,
no,
right,
you can hurt yourself. No, I don't want
Right,
to."
right.
So
You walk down the street looking back.
Yeah, right, looking backwards. Right. So I didn't do that, but I was very sad, and I felt like there's a feeling when you have a loss like that. I'd never experienced any kind of loss, any kind of death, and nobody really understands and this and that. And then I found this record called Blue Lester, which had a picture of Prez, Lester Young, in a pinstripe suit with the horn held like this.
Yeah.
I went to my parents' record collection because I needed music, but I couldn't get into any of the records I was into,
Right.
So no Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, all that was out. So I put on a song, actually Blue Lester, and it starts minor. It goes ba-da-doo-dee, ba-doo-doo-dee, ba-doo-doo-doo-dee-doo-ba-da-dee-dee, ba-da-ba-doo-ba-dee-doo-doo-dee, ba-da-ba-ba-boo-bee-doo-ba-dee-da-ba-boo-bee. And to me, I heard it like the gloom of ba-doo-doo-dee, very sad. And then ba-da-ba-doo-ba-dee-doo-doo-dee. All of a sudden, it went into major, and there was hope. I heard it right there. I heard Prez. He knows. he understands. There's something he knows about pain and suffering in his playing. I could feel it in his sound. And I got fascinated with Lester Young. And from there, I read this Show Business Illustrated article that a friend of ours was reading about Bebop, and it had pictures of Charlie Parker and Thelonious Monk and Dizzy Gillespie and this kind of thing. So I got very curious about that. And my dad had a couple of Dizzy Gillespie records, but we didn't have any Charlie Parker records. But we did have some Dizzy, this record for musicians only with Dizzy and Stitt and Stan Getz.
And that's been reissued now on CD many years ago, so that's available.
Right.
Yeah.
And everything is fast, it's very fast tempos. And I heard Stan Getz. And, I hadn't thought really about, it seemed that jazz was a black thing because everybody I'd listened to was that. I'd heard some Dave Brubeck, but I didn't really care for that too much. But there was Stan Getz, a white Jewish guy, hanging in there with, with these heavy black
Dizzy and Stitt,
musicians, And also the drummer was Stan Levy, another white Jewish boy.
Yeah.
So I said, hey, there might be a chance. Maybe I can play this music. And so 2 things happened at that time. At the age of 12, I'm trying to go through this because I know we have a lot of things to cover.
Sure.
But the fact that I related to this, I was singing all the solos. It just was a natural thing to do.
Right.
Which we'll talk later about, how I give my students things to sing. Right. But I wasn't doing it. I was just doing it because I liked doing it.
Right.
And I would also take my dad's trumpet and put on a beret and dark glasses.
Think you were dizzy.
And pretend I was dizzy and play. I couldn't play the notes to the record, but what I didn't realize I was doing, I was training my fingers to tap these rhythms because Dizzy would go, ba-do-dee-boo-dee, bo-do-ba-do-ba-do-be-da-dee-dee, and there was, I was, tapping the rhythms to these bebop tunes. Without playing the notes, but just pantomiming like.
Right.
And that was like an excellent musician's training.
Sure.
To give me the foundation.
Yeah, rhythmic solidity.
Yeah, and the idea of making the music visceral, which is something I stress in my teaching as well. It's, when I read parts of Ravi Shankar's autobiography years ago, he talks about how in India, they don't even give you the instrument until you can sing and tap these ragas.
Interesting.
Then you get an axe. Then you get to play an instrument. But
and sort of a variation on the French where you have to solfège before you get an instrument.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that interesting? A different concept. Huh.
Excuse me. Yeah, that's the idea. So,
right.
So to me, that means, the very important thing is to feel the music viscerally. Somebody would say, what's the first thing you want to teach somebody about music? Before I'd even tell them that 5/7 goes to 1, I would tell them you have to feel it viscerally. You should tap and sing, as much as you can.
And just a little anecdote on the singing aspect. Reading about Louis Armstrong and his biography and things he said. One of the things that stuck out to me from reading this years ago, I think, was that he considered himself not a trumpet player who sings, but a singer who plays trumpet.
That's very interesting.
Which is, especially growing up in New Orleans and certainly being around all the opera houses as well, and then the blues singers and stuff. But that he actually articulated that at one time, that he was a singer who played trumpet.
Well, I have 2 thoughts on that. One thought is something that, first of all, the second person I heard that I felt knew it, around this time, that had a profound knowledge of this feeling of loss and this feeling of everything. When I heard the version of Porgy and Bess of Louis and Ella Fitzgerald, that was another one of my listen to every day records. When I heard the version of Bess, You Is My Woman Now, and this and that, I could feel all that in Pops, that he had a depth that was very similar to Lester Young in the sense of feeling that
pathos. Yeah.
Pathos.
Yeah. Pathos. Yeah.
Now, the other thing about songs and about singing because I sing, and actually, you might not have heard it, but on the last 2 records I give you, I actually did record a bunch of vocals.
Well, I heard the one with Tony Castellano that you did years ago.
Yeah.
Where you sang a lot with that.
That never came out, but actually 2 records have come out where I sang quite a bit.
Right.
Now it's harder for me to sing with this emphysema condition.
Right.
But still, it was the love of songs. And this is a very important thing, too. I think I was talking with Dave Frischberg a few years ago, and Dave said that one of the things that distinguished Dave and myself from a lot of musicians, and I would say also distinguished Louis Armstrong, I mean, of course you have to love the instrument that you play. But some people got into music because they loved an instrument. He said, but guys like us, we got into music because we loved songs. So the love of songs, I think, is a very important thing, because that also happened when I was 12. Besides listening to this bebop and all these kind of things, I got deeply into Frank Sinatra and Billie Holiday. And also my mother had these records by Chris Connor and June Christie as well.
Right. Beautiful singers.
And Sinatra, Billie Holiday, I loved these standards. I loved these songs, and I loved the way they were 2 other people that felt this pathos and this,
Right.
you know, could really, the depths of happiness, the depths of and joy, and the depths of despair, that was all there, just the same way it was with Prez and Louis.
Yeah.
So I would find these people, and, you know, I said, okay, these are the people who I have to internalize. And then I hadn't heard Chet Baker sing yet, but I heard Mel Torme, and he had a voice a little bit like mine. So I started to sing because I couldn't really play an instrument. We had some drums in the house we got from my little brother. So I would start to play some drums.
Right.
Thought I might want to be a drummer. But again, the coordination was a little bit of a problem. But I learned to play the hi-hat on 2 and 4 and play a rock
So how did you
cymbal.
get to play the uncoordinated alto saxophone?
Okay, so to make a long story short, I started to sing, and I would sing for the neighbors. The neighbors would come over, and this is something Chet Baker and I used to laugh about, because we both had a background like this. We would sing. My mother was a singer,
Right.
and she had sung with Al Donohue's band. She sang with my father's band for a while until she was replaced by Teddy King, who was also the singer with my dad's big band.
Right.
That was when she first came to be known. But my mom was a vocal coach too, and she would teach singers about phrasing and breath control and these kind of things, and she really understood that. So I started to sing, and I would sing for the neighbors, and I had no idea. I'd never been on a date. I was 12 years old, and I'd be singing, you know, you ain't gonna bother me no more, no how. Love goes just so far, no more. Woke up this morning and found I didn't care for you no more. Not now, etc., which is intervallically very difficult, but nobody told me that. And I would just take Billie Holiday's record and copy it. So I could sing all these. I had a repertoire. Before I turned 13, I knew over 100 songs at least, all the lyrics and everything. And I would sing for the neighbors. But then around 13, my voice started to change. And I started to sound like Alfalfa and the Little Rascals. I'm in the mood for love simply because you're here. And once again, I'm back to that with the emphysema. You come full circle.
The whole thing of life.
It's the whole thing. Yeah,
Circle of life.
Right, the whole Megillah, as they say.
Right.
You know. So then, when my voice changed, I decided that I wanted to play the saxophone. Because I was like very much into Stan Getz. And then I heard Charlie Parker. And that was a really big event in my life. You couldn't find a Charlie Parker record. You had to go to the black neighborhood to get a Charlie Parker record in Miami. We moved to Florida now. I had just turned 13. I'd had my bar mitzvah. And I hadn't started playing saxophone yet. I was still singing, but my voice was changing. And I went to Jefferson Department Store where I ordered a Charlie Parker record. So it was The Genius of Charlie Parker. I believe it was volume 2. It had some of the stuff with strings, like Easy to Love. It didn't have Just Friends, but it had Easy to Love. It had repetition. It had
Was it from the jam sessions on there also?
No, this had
Okay.
some of the Verve stuff. It had the second Now's the Time, the Verve Now's the Time. It had Laird Baird. It had The Song Is You.
Wow. Yeah,
It
yeah.
had I Love Paris. It had Love for Sale, some of it from his very last record.
Yes.
It also had 3 or 4 things of Bird with Strings, April in Paris, and a few other things. And I spent the next 8 hours listening to this record until I could sing everything on the record. By the time the day was over, I actually had the record memorized. Brooks Curry used to tell me I had a phonographic memory.
Phonographic.
Yeah,
That's good.
that he had one too. So my good friend Brooks. Then Stan Getz was giving a concert at Miami-Dade Junior College. My parents had split up by this point. This is in September. They split up in March, right after my bar mitzvah, April. And so September, we were somewhere else. And Stan was giving a concert. My mother said, go ahead, and you can go to the Stan Getz concert. You don't have to go to school today, because he was giving a concert at 11 o'clock in the morning and another one at night.
Wow.
So I could sing all these solos of Stan's. So I got there at 10 o'clock, and I saw Gary Burton, Steve Swallow, and Roy Haynes setting up for the concert. And then I talked to them and told them I could sing all the many of Stan's solos and everything. And they said, I said, would you guys like me to get you coffee or something? They said, we'd love that. So I went to the cafeteria, and when I came back, Getz had arrived. And he was playing The Shadow of Your Smile, which was a new song at the time. This was 1965, September 24th, I believe.
Yeah, because that's when the
1965.
Sandpiper was released.
Sandpiper came out,
Right.
and he was going ba-da-ba-da-be-da, be-doo-doo-da, ba-ba-dee-da-da-dee-da-da-dee-da. Remember he played that little lick?
Yeah.
And I said, I almost dropped the coffee on the band. There was Stan Getz. I said, Mr. Getz. He said, oh, you're the kid who can sing my solos? I said, that's me. He said, really? He said, wow. Sing one of them. So I went, boo-ba-doo-ba-doo-beep, ba-ba-doo-doo-beep-ba-doo-ba-doo-beep, and sang Hershey Bar, and then ba-ba-da-beep-boop-bee, ba-ba-da-dee-da, beep-ba-doo-ba-da-ba-doo-ba-dee-doo-doo-dee, boo-lip, boo-ba-da-ba-doo-ba-dee-boo-ee-boo-dee, boo-bee-da-boo-dee-doo-dee, boo-bee-a-ba-doo-bee-a, boo-dee-dee-dee, boo-doo-dee-doo-da-boo-doo-dee-dee-dee, boo-bee-da-boo-dee, boo-bee-a-ba-doo-dee-dee-dee-da, etc. And that's how.
And what was his reaction?
He said, you really can't sing my solos. I said, yeah, I mean, I really love your music. And, he said, that's great. And he was very nice. He liked kids, He didn't always like grown-ups, but he liked kids.
Yeah.
He was a very good father to his children, too. His children love him. When he talked to his kids about him, he didn't do anything wrong. Well, I don't know, but mostly,
Yeah. So how did you come to the alto
Okay,
sax?
so then what happened is, then this is the end of that story. What happened is that night, that day, I said, they make me sitting way in the back. He said, no, you sit on the stage with me. I sweat a lot, and there's no real good air conditioner here. I'll give you towels. When I go like this, you come up and hand me a towel, but you sit in the back of the stage with the band. So then the whole day, I went and I guarded this horn in the closet until the nighttime concert. And I sat on the stage again with the band at the nighttime concert. And I asked Stan for a read. I said, I'm going to start playing saxophone. I decided tonight. And he said, I said, great. And he gave me a 4.5 Rico. So, which was the read he was playing that night. He took it off
I see.
his horn. He said, here, I've played this. It's a little soft for me now. And it was like a 4.5 Rico. So the next day I went to my friend Kenny Weiss at school, and he played in the school band. And I said, do you think I could borrow your saxophone, or you could show me how to put the reed on and do this kind of thing? And I want to try the saxophone. I got a reed last night from Stan Getz. So I put the 4 reed on, and of course got nothing. No, just air.
Right.
And then Kenny said, try this, and he gave me a 2. So he lent me his horn because nobody practiced. I said, can I have your horn for the weekend? He said, sure, it's a school horn. Take it home. And that weekend, I took the tenor home, and I got most of the major scales, and I could play a phrase from Stan Getz's Focus record. Dee-da, 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 da-da, ba-da-bee-ba-da-lo-dee. I figured that out. And I said, I think I might be good at this. because in one weekend I'd gotten further than I ever got with any other instrument, that fast.
Right.
And then I got the alto saxophone for $35. I had an aunt send me $35, and in a pawn shop on Flagler Street, I found a silver turning green Holton, and that was my first saxophone.
Wow. Well, let's jump ahead a little bit now, because from the time you started at 13, 7, 8 years later, you're playing with Charles Mingus.
Right.
So that in between time, I mean, the progress, I mean, let's be clear, this is not usual for anyone to make that type of progress that quickly. So clearly the gift, the ears, the talent was there early on, and it was just a matter of finding the vehicle in which to express that. And
well, I think what was there early on was just the love, because that enabled me to play 8 hours a day.
right. Well, it's all of that. So I'm going to ask you a few questions here about some of the people who were most influential as teachers and people who guided you in the early years of your playing. So I'm going to start off with Phil Woods. So just let's talk briefly about some of these guys.
Sure.
And your recollections of them, but how they helped you.
When I was 15 years old, there was a high school all-star band in Miami, junior high and high school. And it was led by a guy named Alan Rock, who had a jazz radio show down there called Jazz on the Rocks. And it was late. And he put together this band. He was also the guy that introduced me to Ira Sullivan, which we'll talk about later. And this was a high school all-star band that was cooking. I mean, we really could. Some of the guys became professional musicians. Duffy Jackson, son of Chubby Jackson,
Right.
was our drummer.
I see.
The tenor players were Bill Pierce
Wow.
and Mark Colby, who was a very
Sure.
fine player in Chicago. Now he lives in Chicago.
Wow.
One of the trumpet players was Melton Mustafa, who was Melton Jones
Right.
at the time, later played with Count Basie.
Right. So you had there was an array of talented young players there.
This was as good a high school band as I ever heard. And anyway, there was an intercollegiate jazz festival held in Miami that year. And on Saturday morning, we did a clinic with Stan Getz, Oliver Nelson. I think Gary McFarland might have been there. Stan Kenton was there. But Phil really took over rehearsed the band. And I could only play blues in F. And Alan hadn't really let me play any solos, except for this one blues in F, I had a solo. But this day was the day of the college board exams. So I got to play lead alto, and I got to do all the solos, because we had ringers from the college bands in, and they wanted to hear the high school soloists. So I got to take a lot of solos, And I didn't know what a chord change was or anything. And I was thinking I could do it because Ira Sullivan didn't really know changes, and Stan was an ear player. I'd gotten to know Stan in another longer story. I'd gotten to know Stan fairly well.
Right.
So Phil heard me and said, there's a summer camp called Ramblerny in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And, I said, my family has no money for that kind of thing. We were really broke. He said, well, if they can come up with $300 for the whole summer, 6 weeks, that would cover your meals and stuff. He said, but the rest of it we can do a scholarship. And that wasn't even a lot of money then.
Right.
So Phil gave me a scholarship to that camp. And at the camp, there were guys like Roger Rosenberg was there. We became close friends.
Right.
Mike Brecker had been there for the previous 2 years.
I see.
And Mike visited the camp for a week to hang out. He just came to hang because he was a former student of Phil's also. So Mike and I struck up we just gravitated toward each other. And as you saw, when we were at Jersey City University.
When we had that concert years ago at the college, it was a nice reunion.
Yeah, and Mike and I were just very close buddies. And we used to terrorize all the jam sessions in our late teens together. People said, oh, here comes les enfants terribles. Somebody once said, one of the older musicians, here they are. And so I studied with Phil that summer. And there was a guy named Norman Grossman, who was a Broadway drummer, did a lot of Broadway shows and stuff. He was a great harmony teacher. He did the harmony class. And Phil would augment that, the things that Norm was showing me. And Phil took special attention to me. In fact, put 6 saxophones in his big band. There were 2. One was directed by Phil. The other was directed by Chris Swanson. Phil put me in his band. And he saw that I was practicing 8 hours a day. And he would come into my practice room when I was practicing and just show me stuff. And Chan, also I sang in the vocal group, and Chan was the teacher for the vocal group.
Right.
So I became very close to Phil and Chan. And unfortunately, one of the side things from that, the side effects of studying with Phil, is he looked so cool when he smoked. He smoked these true blue cigarettes.
And he would hold them in his right hand when he played.
Yeah,
in between the, I think it was the third and fourth fingers.
Between the index and
it was index? I thought it was third and fourth. But
No,
I
it was
remember,
here.
and he would play like this with it, not
Right.
curved finger, but in order to hold the cigarette. And I remember seeing him play like that also.
Well, the other thing that he did was he said that my first teacher, Teddy Rosen, before that had said, to hold a pencil or take a cigarette and don't light it, but hold it, because instead of flapping your fingers, if you have a cigarette between your fingers,
Be a small emotion.
You use small motion and you won't lift your fingers.
Interesting.
The keys, Somebody once took a lesson with Charlie Parker, and I said, what did you get from that? Or Bob Newman, tenor player. He said, he told me to think of my fingers as 10 little hammers, each having the power of a hammer. So then you only need a light touch.
Interesting.
And anyway, the cigarette kept it close to the key. And I didn't light a cigarette until the Democratic Convention, when I was watching it on TV in Chicago in 1968. I was watching it in New England at my grandparents' house. And I was seeing people I knew had gone to Chicago, and they were getting their heads bashed in, some of them.
Yeah.
So I lit a cigarette, and that's when it started.
Yeah. By the way, Phil also, like you, had emphysema at the end of toward the last 15 years of his life or so. And you told me a great little anecdote that Phil said about that.
Yeah, Phil said that emphysema was God's way of telling you that your solos have been too long.
Yeah, and he always had a way of putting a spin on things that were sort of a brilliant way of looking at things.
He was brilliant and funny, and I actually went and spent a Christmas with him. They almost adopted me, and that's another story that would take hours.
Yeah, but the point is, you had this master teaching you at a young age, and being encouraging to you. And that had to give you a sense of,
Right. Well, my first teacher, Teddy Rosen, also in Miami, was a tremendously great musician.
Right.
Had studied with Lenny Tristano and played, beautiful tenor. He made a living in the shows in Miami,
Right.
But he showed me how to play the saxophone correctly. So that was why I had only been playing a year and a half when Phil heard me.
Right.
But the reason I'd gotten so good too was Teddy. I've got to always acknowledge
Right.
Teddy.
All right, so let's talk about Ira Sullivan a little bit, someone who was a legend already in Miami by that time that you were down there, and for many decades forward. How did he influence you?
Well, Ira had just moved to Miami. I met Ira when I was 13. I think Ira was 34. And he was a tremendous influence. I mean, how many people that age, he really took me under his wing and would talk to me for hours. We would sit in his car and we would discuss Charlie Parker, the Bible. I was a very strong Christian and has a really beautiful way of putting it. It's not what you might expect from some of the people on the street corner.
Right.
He's given it a lot of thought and influenced my thinking greatly. We would talk about what it took to be a jazz musician. The dedication that Ira had to it was just by example. I learned a lot.
Incredible.
And as I got older, he let me sit in a little bit. And I remember finally, when I was about 17, 18, Ira said, I speak to you as an equal now. And that meant a lot to me.
Wow. So, I mean, you clearly you didn't have a traditional music education like certainly kids today who go to a high school and then go to college and become a music major and then learn from whatever teachers are at that college. I mean, you learned literally at the foot of masters on the bandstand and in an informal way that is really, harkens back to a, early part of the 20th century, the way people learned.
That's true, but I also did have a lot of university experience. For example, when I was at the University of Miami, I never went to the University of Miami.
Right, you sat in.
I sat in. Well, Jerry Coker, heard me sitting in with Ira Sullivan. And Jerry was the head of the University of Miami Jazz Department.
Right, and a magnificent jazz educator.
And a really good tenor player.
Yeah.
So Jerry heard me and said, listen, why don't you come by the university and we'll stick you in the band. You know, you can improve your reading and do that, and we'll give you some solos. We'll make you like a soloist with us. Because he was impressed with my playing. This is after I came back from Phil's camp. At this point, I was 17.
Right.
And I'd had other experiences in between. So I was playing pretty well, and well enough that Ira would let me sit in. And, you know, he'd stomp at me and play Cherokee in B, and, you know, those kind of things.
Yeah. Those are the days before the Abasol Music -1 Cherokee in 12 keys.
Right.
I mean, you had to do it yourself.
But you had to do it yourself, and you had to be ready for wherever I was going to do it.
Yeah.
So while I was there, I met a beautiful piano player named Mike Gerber, who's a blind pianist. And Mike didn't have a roommate, so I slept on the box spring and he slept on the mattress. And I was just about, my mother was mentally ill, so it was very hard to live at home.
Right.
So I was away, and I would stay either with Tony Castellano, a wonderful piano player who became one of my best friends. He and his twin brother Dolph were both amazing musicians, and I stayed at Tony's house a lot. I lived with Tony. But between that, it was like between Tony and the University of Miami, Mike's room, and Mike and I would go into the practice room late at night when it was closed. We found a way to open the door, and we'd go and we'd practice until the sun came up, and we'd play, Stella by Starlight in different keys or whatever we were working on.
Right.
So that was very important. We'd do that, and so then I was at the university, and I was offered a full scholarship to the university. I audited every class that I liked. Any class.
You were the ultimate sitter in, whether it be on the bandstand or in college. You
Right,
sat in everywhere.
I was just dropping in. And Jerry Coker said to me, look, they want to offer you a full scholarship. Plus, I was writing term papers for the jazz history class. I was making good money. I was teaching the students at the university for $3 a lesson. And I was writing term papers for like $20 for the students. And Larry Lappin, who was the teacher of the jazz history department.
Yeah, he was a famous guy down there
at the university. Well, Larry said we actually played a club date together at one point or something. I don't remember exactly how this came up, but he said, Bobby, everybody called me Bobby. I know that you've been writing these term papers for people because even though you can feel you're trying to write a different style, but you have a style of writing that I could tell, the paper on Bud Powell was very similar to the writing on Coleman Hawkins, and so I wanted to say, you haven't fooled me.
Yeah.
And, I could do things like if I were an academic type, I'd have you thrown off the campus, it's really bad what you did. You can't be doing this.
Right.
But, we'll just forget it because it's you, so it was good. So anyway, I did that, and I went to the University of Miami. And Jerry Coker said to me, you should turn down the scholarship. They wanted to offer me. I dropped out of high school, but I had to get my high school equivalency. And then you can have a full scholarship to the university. But I said, Jerry told me to say, he said, you go to New York, go back to New York. You should be in New York. So I took his advice and did that.
Right.
And my other experience in academia was when I went to New York and I met Jackie Byard. And I had sat in with Jackie, and Jackie brought me to Harvard University to play a concert with him, with Buell Neidlinger on bass and Alan Dawson on drums. And I was, I just turned 18. And then Jackie said, well, I teach at New England Conservatory. So if you ever want to, come up there, you can take my classes and, hang out with me, even help me teach the class,
Right.
I said, that would be great just to be around Jackie, because he was such a phenomenally great musician. And I happened to have a friend from Miami that I got to high school with named David Reskin, who was a flutist, and he was going to New England Conservatory, and he happened to have a room there, and he had a roommate who was on the road all the time, this blind pianist named Gordon. So he was only there for exams. So I had the extra bed in David's room.
Man, you found a way to keep maneuvering. That you are named correctly, Bob Mover.
I am. I mean, it worked out,
You really are something, man.
So I lived in Jordan Hall. I lived in the dorm because you could practice any hour of the night. The practice rooms were all downstairs.
I see.
So I would organize jam sessions in the main lounge. I even got to the point where they gave me meals. They thought I went there. I said, I can't find my meal card. They say, oh, come on, we know you. And I got to know all the teachers that I'd hear the gossip among the students, like, hey, there's a class in Schenkerian analysis by this guy, Ernst Oester. And it's like fantastic because you take the solo and you follow it through note to note and blah, blah, blah.
Right. Yeah.
So in the cafeteria, he ate lunch there. I'd walk over to him and I say, Mr. Oester, I wonder, I don't have your class, but if I might be able to audit your class. And, I'll be quiet. I won't,
Yeah.
But may I? Oh, of course. So we come in and study the Bach cello suites and do the analysis of the Bach cello suites. And my grandmother gave me a present. So she said, what do you want for your... I said, I want lessons. So I studied composition with Joseph Maneri. And he was teaching the Schoenberg Harmony book.
Wow.
Not 12-tone, but the
right.
book.
The actual...
the blue book.
Yeah, I have it back in my other room. It's a huge theory book. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I finished that. He told me I just about finished it in 6 months, where he said most people take a year and a half, 2 years, but I ate it up.
Right.
I was writing chorales and figured bass and day and night. And then when I wasn't practicing, I was always practicing. And then I got gigs playing strip shows in the combat zone. So I'd play there at night and live at the New England Conservatory.
So
and take classes
you were, in a sense, really on the road from the time, in a sense, like a jazz musician on the road. We hear stories about that and the guys who toured with the big bands in the 30s and the 40s and the lifestyle. You were doing this from the time you were a kid, in essence, in a different way. But you were really like a road warrior from the time you were a young guy.
Yeah, I would go between New York, Boston, and Miami.
Right.
Those are my 3 spots.
Wow. Now, I do want to get to some of the people you played with, some of the famous band leaders. So let's, in order, go first with Charles Mingus, who you got to when you were roughly around 21. And I know you have a lot of stories about that, but let's concentrate on what you learned from being around Charles Mingus and being in his band.
All right, well, I first met Mingus when I was 19. He was playing at the Jazz Workshop in Boston, and I was living in Boston at the time. And I just finished hanging out at New England Conservatory and was on my own. I joined him when I was 21. I was going to join him then. He asked me to join him at 19. And that's when I met Charles McPherson, who was a big influence on me too, and was so kind to me. We both are good friends with Charles.
Charles is one of the special people in the world.
He is. And so since he was leaving the band, and Mingus said, I want you to replace McPherson. We're going to Europe. We didn't go because Mingus's book came out, Beneath the Underdog, and he had a chance to do the Dick Cavett show. So he canceled the tour and stayed in the States to do the Dick Cavett show. But McPherson was showing me, give Charles a little bit more. You give him a little Johnny Hodges here. I know, you're more of a bird guy, but,
following Charlie Mariano's approach.
Right.
Right,
of course. That version of Celia and the Black and the Sinner Lady and all that stuff. Yeah. But Charles McPherson even said to me, he said, I can't give him that kind of Johnny Hodges. McPherson said, Charlie Mariano really gave him that, but I tried to give him something else. He said, I can't quite get myself to do that. I had trouble with that too, but I did it best I could. But Mingus, he was a very erratic type of cat. I mean, he could be really nice to you one day and then turn on you at another time. But it made me stronger. It made me realize that, those tunes were challenging. Things like Reincarnation of a Lovebird and Self-Portrait in 3 Colors, Peggy's Blue Skylight, all those things.
Very unusual tunes.
Unusual tunes.
Yes.
Made me be strong in a certain way. Listening to him compose on the piano, he was writing between sets. He would sit at the piano.
And a wonderful pianist.
Yeah, and so I would get to hear him. That might have been the best part of the gig, was listening to Mingus play piano between sets. And he was composing. I heard him compose The Eye of Hurricane Sue and Duke Ellington's Sound of Love.
Wow.
We'd hear it from night to night. He would evolve it, and then finally it would be, you'd hear it evolve and become something. So that was a beautiful thing. And at times he was very supportive and very, very loving, nice cat. And then other times he'd be in a bad mood.
Right.
But
obviously as a young player, 21-year-old guy playing with Mingus, it's got to be a huge influence, but it's also got to be a huge boost to your confidence that you would be up on the bandstand, and Mingus would, want you there, and you'd be there. How many months were you at the 5 spot?
About maybe 5 months.
5 months. Okay. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a tremendous boost. Now, let's jump ahead.
Also, the other thing is
Okay.
that he did say to me years later, I said, Charles, I know we had our funny moments and this and that, but I want to tell you how much I learned from you. He was sick at this time. I wanted to tell him that. He said, yeah, I've been hearing a lot of good things about you too. I hear you don't got so much to prove no more. So
Right.
see, you can see it one way. I can say, I was thinking, well, Mingus was nasty and he was this way and that and that. But then if I look at myself at 21, yeah, I had a lot to prove. And that kind of fortunately goes away as you get older.
Right.
So I might have been really difficult in my way for him,
Right. So it's an interesting perspective. Chet Baker.
Chet Baker was a beautiful cat, man. I love Chet. He was sometimes not the easiest person too, but he was always cool with me, He was, we shared this love of songs. We drove once from New York to California with Chet and Ruth, Ruth Young, his girlfriend at the time, who's a singer, and Jacques Pelzer and me. And I swear we must have sang 200 songs together. And he played the same songs a lot, but the tunes that he knew, we'd be sitting there, hey, Chet, remember, it's only human for anyone to want to be in love. And he'd go, but who wants to be in love in vain? And, he was driving his Mustang, which the window didn't go down. He had to put a pillow in the window.
Oh, my gosh.
And this Mustang, this is the guy who had Maseratis, you know what I mean? But he had really had to be humble about this.
All right. So, Bob, you've had these wonderful experiences with some great band leaders. And you've grew up and had Phil Woods and Ira Sullivan as mentors. Now, in later years, you had more mentors, guys who were giants, and you were already establishing yourself as a young lion in New York at that time. And let's talk about 2 or 3 of these great players. Let's start with Lee Konitz, and how you came to be influenced by Lee.
I heard a record when I was 17 years old in Miami called Motion Lee, which is a trio with Lee and Elvin Jones and Sonny Dallas. And I'd heard a little bit of the Tristano things earlier, but they hadn't really gotten to me yet. But when I heard this, I guess because the swing was, a little different and deeper, I really got amazed by that. So I decided, it was spring vacation at the University of Miami, and there was a bulletin board, and it said, rides to New York, for 10 days. So I took the ride for, I think it was $15 round trip. It was great, in 1969. And I knew that Lee Konitz was in New York because I would still read the Village Voice. I would get it every week wherever I was. And there were ads for musical study in the back.
Right, he would advertise studying it. I remember that.
And I remember his ad. His ad was great. It said, Lee Konitz accepting students, all instruments, all levels, advanced, intermediate, beginners, tone deaf. That was
great.
That was Lee's ad.
That part I don't remember.
Yeah, I remember. That was Lee's ad. So now this is where I believe in God and fate and synchronicity and these types of things, that there is something larger than us out there that guides our lives. So I got this ride, and I went to Brooks Kerr, my good friend, who had a place on East 62nd Street, a townhouse. So I said, I remembered when we got to Washington, D.C., I hadn't called Brooks yet. I had nowhere to stay in New York. I said, Brooks, oh, by the way, I'm coming up. I should be there in about 5 hours to New York. And he says, sure, you can stay with me, but, why so suddenly? I said, well, because I got to meet Lee Konitz. I've heard this record, and I've got to come there. He says, okay, listen, I'm going out to the Half Note to hear Roy Eldridge, but I'll leave the key in a strategic place and just let yourself in, make yourself at home, blah, blah, blah. So that happened. I come in there about 2 in.the. Brooks walks in like the cat that ate the canary. He's got this big smile. Now, Brooks is blind.
Yes.
And Brooks was blind. Brooks had this fantastically happy smile on his face. He said, Bob, you're not going to believe what happened. He said, but I was at the Half Note listening to Roy Eldridge. And I struck up a conversation with the guy next to me at the bar. And he was very erudite, knew a lot about music, knew a lot about Roy. And, to make a long story short, it was Lee Konitz. So I told him about you, and he said, come by this address tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock, and he'll give you a lesson.
Unbelievable.
And it was Dick Katz's studio, and I took this lesson, and Lee said he made me play by myself, and I remember we played I Remember April. I played it by myself, then I played it in different keys. He had me, go through this. And finally, Dick Katz walks in. Lee says, now it's complete. Play it with a piano player. So I played it with Dick. And Lee was very complimentary and really nice. And I told him I only had $15. He charged more than that. But he said, well, just give me what you can take, what you can, because I really need the money too. He was pretty broke. I was surprised. And he gave me a copy of the Lee Konitz Duets record, which had just come out on Milestone.
Right.
And I got that, and I had my record. And from then on, we stayed in touch.
And eventually you made a record with Lee.
Eventually, yes, we had a band together at Sweet Basil. We played, and we played around New York with young Kenny Washington at 18 years old. And, various, the record is with Jimmy Madison actually on drums.
Right.
And Benny Aronov and Mike Moore.
Yeah.
We
lost Benny a couple of years
I
ago.
love Benny,
I did too. He lived right here in Riverdale too.
Yeah.
Right around the corner from me. Yes.
And he had his wife, a French lady.
Yes.
Beautiful lady.
Yes.
Wonderful. He did all those years of Cats, but that's another story.
That's true. And he also taught at the school, I think just before you did, when at the university. He was my first jazz piano teacher at the university. I love Benny. But anyway, not to digress. So Lee was obviously a
So
big
I met
influence.
Lee, and Lee would start to let me sit in at the half note with him when he'd play there. And then up until, when I was about 25, 26,
Right.
we were getting together regularly, and he was a big influence on me, as was Warren Marsh, who I didn't know. I met once, but that's another story,
Right.
which we won't go into. But
Now let's go on. Let's look at another influence, Zoot Sims.
Zoot was a wonderful cat, man, and was just Zoot and Al, both of them. I studied arranging with Al, and actually would pay Al money. My dad gave me money to study. I was studying saxophone with Richie Kamuka.
Was this in New York or
In
Boston?
New York.
Really?
When I was 16, we moved to New York. My father and I.
So you moved back from Florida to New York.
To New York. I'd never been in New York. I'd never lived in New York.
I see.
We were living in Ohio, actually.
Man, is there a part of the country you haven't lived in?
Yeah, the West Coast. I studied with a very good saxophone player in Cincinnati, where we were living, named Gordon Brisker, who died a few years ago. But Gordy had been with Woody Herman's band and was kind of overshadowed by Sal Nistico, but was a terrific player and a terrific teacher and taught me a lot. I learned a lot from Gordon. But we were living with a girlfriend of my father's in Ohio, and my brother and sister went back to live with my mother, but I couldn't really do that. They went to Florida.
I see.
So my dad and I were moving to the woman we were living with got killed in a car accident, and I wasn't going to stay in Ohio anyway. We were, and just after that, my dad and I moved to New York, and I turned 16. We moved in March of 1968 to New York, and yes, so there I began to study with Richie Kamuka, who was on the Merv Griffin show.
Right.
And I would go down to the Merv Griffin show. He was in the band.
Right.
And while I took my lessons with Richie in the back room, some of the guys in the band would watch my lessons. So guys such as Jim Hall, Bob Brookmeyer, Bill Watrous, Randy Brecker was on there sometimes, Snooky Young. These guys would all watch Richie teach me. They wouldn't sit and stay.
Right.
But they'd all catch a glimpse of a minute of our lesson. So they're just curious watching Richie show me about melody playing and breathing and various things. And I used to babysit Richie's kids.
And he was a tremendously underestimated and certainly didn't receive the publicity that he should have, because he was really fantastic improviser, a creative tenor player.
He was an amazing player. He was a great player.
Really?
He took Zoot's thing and made it personal.
Yeah.
In his own way.
Right. So how did that lead you to Zoot?
Well, because of that, Richie was playing at the half note.
I see.
See, Brooks Kerr and I used to go down to the half note all the time. We became like family at the half note.
I see.
And Richie was working with Roy Eldridge, and they would let me sit in. I started sitting in with Roy Eldridge when I was 16. But the first person I actually sat in with was Zoot, because Zoot and Al would play there, or Al would have a quartet, or Zoot would have a quartet, or the both of them.
Right.
The half note was home.
Right.
And half note became my home. I got to know the Cantorino family very well. There was a $3.50 minimum, which you could eat or drink. And they would, if I didn't have the money, they didn't make me pay it. But, they would give me wine spritzers, which looked like Coca-Cola.
Right.
So I could have a little glass of wine with a spritzer.
Right.
And I would come in and I'd take my lessons with Al in Midtown, and then he'd take me to Jim and Andy's afterwards, which is another story. Jim and Andy's was a
That was a
wonderful
famous musician.
you know, I
hang
could
out.
write a whole book. I hope to write a book about all these experiences. But anyway, and Zoot and Al, or one or the other, was playing. So I sat in with Zoot for the very first time. I sat in New York, and he called Indiana, and I was very confident about Indiana, and started coming in and blowing in A flat because that's where Donna Lee was.
Right.
Well, the real key is F. So, you know, we did the nice beginning of the melody in minor thirds. And then I realized that I was not in the key that Zoot was.
Yeah.
And
It's like Bird's initiation as a young player playing
Body and Soul was
one of the tunes in the one key that he knew it. And it was
Honeysuckle Rose, I think, something like that.
something
right?
like,
Yeah, something like that. But, you know, so immediately that was my lesson in transposition. And I got through it. And, you know, and Sue was nice to me. But years later, when I was 23 in 1975, summer of 75, I went with Chet to the Grand Parade de Jazz festival in Nice. And that was like all these all-star concerts and stuff. And Zoot and I really became very good friends at this festival. He had the room across the hall from me. And I would run into him on the street at like 2 in the morning. He'd say, you know, you got anything to drink in your room? I say, yeah, I got something. And I thought that the drinks, those little bottles in the refrigerators, were just given to musicians. I'd never, you know,
you learned on checkout
so
what it was
Zoot
like.
drank we'd go to his room. He'd say, your room's a mess. Let's go to my room. And Zoot would tell me stories, and we'd talk, and we became, you know, close. And I played a few concerts with him. And, you know, he would compliment me. And you know, I was very happy when we got back to New York. I went to hear him at Hopper's one night, and he had his wife with him. And he said, oh, baby, this is the young cat I told you about. I thought, that's so nice, you know.
Yeah. And now, finally, Sonny Rollins.
Sonny Rollins, I met in 1973. No, 72. I just turned 20. And I went to New York, and I was living in Boston, but I was making the transition into living in New York. He played at the Vanguard. He hadn't been on the scene for a while.
I remember that with Albert Daly.
Albert Daly,
Larry
Ridley, and David Lee.
Yes, I remember that. It
drums.
was like 2 weeks, I think he was there.
2 weeks at the Vanguard.
Yes, I remember that period.
And
yes.
I got 2 nights at the front table. And between sets, I had written Sonny a letter, and I had not mailed it. But between sets, he was just sitting there. He didn't even go to the back room. He was just sitting there, and people were walking up to him and saying, Sonny, how you doing? And blah, 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 good to have you back. And he was just friendly with everybody. And he was sipping a scotch, which I was surprised because I thought he only drank carrot juice.
Those were the days of the dashiki, and he had big afro, if I remember. He was healthy. Yeah. Oh, he looked like a god.
Oh, yeah, and he was playing like a god.
He was.
He was playing, and he was still playing, he was playing Three Little Words and Love Letters and In the Sentimental Mood and Easy to Remember.
Yes, and St. Thomas.
And St. Thomas and Strode Road he was playing.
Yes.
And I was just, you know, knocked out. So anyway, between sets, I started talking to him. And actually, he even gave me a sip of his scotch. Said, "You want some of this?" And I said, "Yeah, thanks." You know, and we're sharing this, and we're talking between people. I finally told him I wrote him this letter. He said, "Well, what'd you say in the letter?" I said, "Well, I really liked what you said about a fine musician can play with anyone, just as a good person can get along with anyone. And I have a feeling there's a lot of humanity in your playing, and I would like to get next to you because besides music, I think you could teach me a lot about humanity." I've had Ira Sullivan, and he and Ira were very close in Chicago. He said, "Well, you know, Ira is one of my main men. Ira and I, we hung out hours and hours together in Chicago. We played a lot together, and we started to talk." So Ira was my key in New York. I'd mention Ira to somebody.
It would get you.
Yeah, and
pass.
You know,
yeah.
it was you know.
Right.
So.
Did you actually ever practice with Sonny and play with him?
Yeah, that's the thing that was funny. So finally, the second night we're talking, and Sonny says, "From the way you talk about music, it seems like you must play pretty well. Do you?" So I had to think about it. And I said, yeah, I can play. And Sonny smiles. He's got the greatest smile and laughs. And he says, "Isn't it nice when you know you're good?"
Really?
Yeah, he said, "Isn't it nice when you know you're good?" I thought that was really good. And then we talked about that, about confidence and this and that. I said, "So I really want to study with you." I said, "Really, one of the reasons I want to be in New York is to get next to you and study with you." And Sonny says, "Well, I'm sorry, I don't teach. I really don't teach." I said, he says, "Yeah, I don't like to examine my processes."
Huh.
He says, "I don't like to, if I start showing, then I start thinking about them. And then, I just don't like to do that." I said, "Well, I sure understand that." And I was like this. He says, "But we can practice together."
Sure.
So he did. He came over to Brooks Kerr's house
Incredible.
and practiced. We played about 2 hours in the afternoon.
Isn't that amazing that someone at the height of his career, I mean, and I know he did this, I think in the 60s, Eddie Daniels told me he used to practice with Sonny. They would play together for...
Steve Lacy, too. A lot
Yeah,
of
I
people.
mean, isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, he's a wonderful guy. He loved, like Ira, they have this generosity of spirit, which is something that I found with great players.
So you've really had a potpourri of great artists and people of different backgrounds and different experiences and different approaches to playing as influences. And maybe that's why, as a teacher, you can offer so much and are analytically very on top of things, I've found over the years, that you really can nail things because you've been exposed to the who's who of in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the things I was taught. I was, I think, a good student in the sense that I gave complete attention. I realized how special the circumstances were, that here I am, with these cats whose pictures are on my wall. It's like they've come down off the wall in some kind of movie fantasy, and here they are.
It's a Woody Allen movie coming to the
yeah, right.
Selling.
Exactly. Yeah, Selling or the Purple Rose of Cairo. The actor comes out, jumps off the screen.
Right.
Yeah, because there they were, and they were showing me. They were, saying, "Well, Bob, and they had, and humor, you see, was so prevalent in all these people. Sonny and I, so people say, "What are you talking about with Sonny?" I said, "Well, we talk about everything. We've talked about concepts of God and religion and spirituality and all these things. And we've told each other dirty jokes for hours. Jokes, some clean, some dirty.
Right.
But Sonny loves a good joke. He loves a good laugh."
Yeah.
Zoot was a prankster. I'd get on the bandstand with Zoot. This happened when I got back from Europe. He'd say, "Bobby, get your horn out. Come on, play a set with me." I go on, he'd say, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have with us a guy who I would consider a young man that I've met. I've known him since he was younger, but we really got to know each other in Europe this summer. And I consider him a dear friend of mine. I'd like you to meet my good friend, Bob Mover." And I was humbled and feeling, wow. The audience gives me a round of applause. Bob's going to play a set with us. "Bob, tangerine?" "Sure, Zoot." 1, 2, 1. And then he stopped and put it at a reasonable tempo.
Yeah.
But he just wanted to do that, the whole setup, the whole build-up.
Yeah.
What good friends you are. He said, I'm saying over and over, friend.
Right.
My friend, Bob. My
Right.
This is how I treat my friend.
Yeah, right. But that's part of the spirit of the great jazz artist.
And Phil, when we did this Alto Summit in Europe, we had Jackie McLean, Phil, Frank Morgan, Vincent Herring, and myself. I think that was all. And Jackie McLean. So we're there and we play at the sound check, the rehearsal. We're sitting there and we're all playing Shaw Nuff and Donna Lee. Those are the two tunes the six of us are doing together. Then there's other tunes. We have features. Solos do.
Right.
So we sit there and we play. We go through the whole head of Donna Lee with 6 different concepts of time, of 8-note playing.
Sure.
So we finish, and it's kind of a silence because it really didn't make it. We got to find a way to sound blended better. Phil goes, "Flame keepers? Yes. Timekeepers?
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, again, back to that thing. Phil was brilliant. He always found a way to just say the right thing to summarize a situation.
Yeah, he was very good at that.
He really was.
So, and also the things I learned from Sonny Rollins about the idea of seeing the big picture in music and life. And he would just say little nuggets sometimes, he'd say, now, a talented person takes the thing that appears complex and finds a simplicity. An untalented person takes the simplest things and makes it complicated.
And that can apply to anything in life, right?
That's right, anything in life.
Yeah.
Let's try for the simplest solution to things, to try to find the way to cut,
to cut to the chase.
to the chase.
Yeah, right.
And the other thing he told me was about piano players, that saxophone players are translators of pianists. He felt that Bird and Don Byas were translating Tatum in a way, and that he was translating Bud and Monk, and that I was translating those people. Plus, I had people like Albert Daly, and those
Interesting.
To translate, and that how literally he had taken the voicings. Sonny very rarely told you anything specific to do, but I would say, what do you practice? He said, well, intervals, this and that, and then I said, well, can you give me something? He said, well, okay. You take a voicing that a pianist plays, and since we can't play it all at once, play all the voicings you can, one note at a time.
Right.
And just keep practicing voicing. So that was a very good thing to do.
Huh, interesting. Yeah. Now, let's segue from that into your teaching thing. One of the things we have talked about recently and preparing for the interview is practicing incrementally. So can you talk a little bit how you do that and how you try out different things melodically, harmonically, rhythmically in doing that our listeners could, take something away from?
Sure, maybe I need the horn for that.
Yeah. All right, let's see if the reed is still wet. It's been sitting here a while. I think it is.
Well, let's see.
By the way, thank my friend Alan Wan for allowing us to use his special neck strap, which Bob has really found to be helpful.
Better, yeah.
It's a great find. Thank you, Alan.
Okay, just let me adjust it.
So, tell us now how you would instruct a student in practicing, let's say, a melodic concept in increments.
Okay, well, I might take a motif and see if I can take 8 bars of a song and play it and give myself a melodic motif to vary. So it's almost, I think of it like a question and answer.
Right.
But
using that, let's say, of an AABA standard, let's just taking the A section, you would take that 8 bars and then work that 8 bars.
Yeah, I'd take that 8 bars. If I was thinking melodically, let's say I'm playing, I don't know, Star Eyes or something, or You Stepped Out of a Dream.
Which one you want?
We'll say Star Eyes.
Okay. All right, so that's the first 16 of the AA section before the bridge and Star Eyes. And you're thinking obviously very hard about the melody of Star Eyes, and we can hear that very clearly there.
Right. Well, I like to be able to go back to the melody whenever I can, and to think that melodies grow out of the melody itself. Right. Star Eyes, be dot. And the repetition. Walter Davis told me like an interesting story about confirmation. For example, confirmation is a musical term. Because Walter said to Bird when he played confirmation, he said, "Bird, are you Catholic?" He said, "What do you mean?" "No, I'm not, Walter." He said, "Well, you wrote a tune, Confirmation. The only way I've heard of it really is confirmation." He said, "No, it's a musical term. where when you play something, you confirm it. So let's say the strategy, it's like I believe in improvising strategies. So strategically, So the strategy is to confirm something. And that makes it make sense. Like, for instance, when you have boo bip ba dee ba, there's the confirmation. It's all over the place.
Right.
There's the confirmation.
Right.
And beat up is also a kind of confirmation.
Right. That little rhythmical motive, melodic motive, as it were.
Yeah.
To do it. So when you're improvising, let's say back to the Star Eyes A section. Let's do this for our listeners. Let's just play the first 8 bars of Star Eyes, the melody, pure melody,
Sure.
and then let's improvise on the same 8 bars. Okay, and now with that strong melodic concept, that how would you confirm that in your play, in your improvising? Wow, I mean it's a beautiful way of really keeping the form, but also keeping evolving by having something to always sort of relate back to and in and around.
It gives it a continuity.
Yeah.
And that's just sort of just thinking melodically.
Right.
So I'm just really thinking key of C or key of E flat concert.
Concert, right.
And then to the key of D flat. And then the key of F.
Right.
So what I do also is I think of analyzing a tune in terms of points of rest. Because you have a tonic. Bill Evans said that a song is a story about a tonic and chords either expanding away from the tonic or contracting toward the tonic. So in this case, we have the tonic key of E flat, and expanding to the 2/5 back to E flat.
Right.
Then expanding away from E flat to a temporary tonic, or what we used to call points of rest, of D flat.
I see.
So any major seventh you land on, or minor major seventh, anything that's a one tonal center for something. And then up a major third from there to the 2 major. So the song, if somebody asked you, just like they'd say, what is the story of Red Riding Hood about? It's about a girl and a wolf and a grandmother. Okay, this is about the tonic of E flat and the movement up, down a whole step, and then a movement to the key a whole step above E flat. And when you get to the bridge, it's interesting too, because it goes up to the 4, and then down a whole step from there.
Right.
And then back to the tonic key.
Right. So again, it's not only using the knowledge of the tune and the structure and the intimate aspects of it, but now you're looking at it from, that type of analysis as a springboard to creating something melodically, rhythmically, and of course harmonically.
Right,
that.
and also not having to read the changes.
Right.
In other words, to know, by heart, to learn instead of memorize. It's very important. People talk about memorizing things, and I don't really believe in memorizing. I think you have to learn it. Of course, memorization is a process that takes place when you're learning.
Right, but to get beyond the conscious is what you're saying.
Right, to get there. So then I say, well, okay, let's say if I have the idea of a diminished chord. If I'm going to put let's say that's a melodic option. Let's just say the idea of playing a sequence, or is one way to do it. There are other things you can do that way, but we don't have the time to go into all of it. Right. But let's say you're just thinking, okay, on all my dominant sevenths, I'm going to play them some kind of a diminished, in the diminished way.
Okay.
Now, one thing that was interesting is I learned from Kenny Dorham when I was 17 and would ask him questions. I said to KD, when you're playing a tune, nobody gave you a real book in those days. There was no real book. And, you really didn't bring music to the band. You didn't go to your phone and find the changes.
Right.
You just, if you didn't know the tune, you were cooked.
Yeah.
So, I said, well, when this is happening and you don't really know where it's heading, how do you find out the keys? How do you, I try. I said, he said, well, of course you try to see where the tune rests. And then there's a diminished trail through the changes that, like, all the dominants have diminished. So if you could hear that ba ba bo wee dee, ba ba bo be da dwee dee doo doo dee, ba ba bo be dee da dwee doo.
But again, this is something Barry Harris always stressed in the dominance and the diminished and how they would relate and influence one another. Can you demonstrate in that first 8 bars of Star Eyes how you would apply like a diminished situation to where we would normally have the 2/5 resolution?
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'm making the harmonic shift from playing the 2 chord into when I have the diminished. When I have the 5/7, I'm using the diminished.
Right.
So I might take a cliche. In other words, this is not really, as Phil used to tell us, it's a craft before it's an art. So the idea is that this isn't the artistic part.
You have to learn this
part.
Right. You have to practice this.
Right. So I might go. So even to play. So you're imagining, saying to yourself, I'm thinking, I'm not even playing the melody. I'm thinking,
Yeah, yeah.
So in a very simple way, I've just heard where that diminished trail is through those changes.
Right.
And then I might improvise. I'm saying my strategy is to go from the major scale to the Dorian, which is still the major scale, or melodic minor, whatever, but then to the diminished chord on the 5/7 and see what I can come up with there.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. Let's talk about now rhythmically how you would practice on a tune like Star Eyes in this same 8-bar section.
Okay, I might say that I have a thing that I call meet the beats. In other words, where you
Meet the Press. This is Meet
the Beats.
Right, the longest running musical show.
Right, and not Kerouac and those guys. But,
right.
But so in other words, the idea is to get familiar. Well, this is all loose. That's what it is. With different parts of the time.
Okay.
So on each cadence, let's say I might start, because you want to. People have a tendency to play their phrases on one, largely because of the real book. because you have those changes two to a bar.
Right.
So da 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 da.
Right.
So to get away from one, first you might go on one. So I might go. So that's all.
You're strictly on 1 and 3.
I hit one. Every phrase began on one.
One, right.
Now I play the end of one. 1, 2, 3.
Right.
No.
Beautiful. And then you would you start on different beats following this?
Yeah,
Each
until
one a different beat?
I'm at the end of 4. 1, 2, 3.
So alternating practicing on different parts of the beat, starting your phrases, pick up to or after, but not necessarily square on the downbeat, not square on one.
Right.
As a way of freeing yourself.
Right, and even being able to sing that type of thing too.
Right. So, and especially because you emphasize singing so much, but let's say not only singing the lyrics as you require for every one of your students to learn the lyrics to every tune, which is obviously so essential, but if you're scatting, if you're singing an improvised line, singing those lines on different parts of the beat as well, starting your phrases on different parts of the beat, as you said.
Right.
You know,
It could be a quarter note, it could be 8 notes.
right. Yeah, it's such a useful thing. And I just want to touch on a thing I referenced because I know from your teaching how important the lyrics are. But and even when you taught at the university where we were at together years ago, you always made sure that the students learned the lyrics. And at juries, you said, well, tell me what the lyric is on a certain phrase where maybe the student was scuffling. And 9 times out of 10, the student didn't know the lyric at that moment. And it was a very interesting thing that I was able to sit back and observe, that learning the lyrics, as you say, learning it so that it's not a conscious thing, it's part of it, influences everything, really. The feeling you have to a tune, that maybe even the key that you're going to choose, and certainly perhaps gives you an idea about improvising in a different manner for any particular tune.
Well, what I've noticed is that the great players, when confronted, when playing a standard, the blues, I got rhythm. That doesn't necessarily apply to that,
Right.
But even with the blues, it can, there's lyrics. Don't the moon look lonesome shining through the trees? Don't the moon look lonesome shining through the trees?
Yes.
Don't your house feel empty, lonesome when your baby packs up and leaves?
Right.
So there's a feeling, which you even feel with Charlie Parker, again, like a singer who's playing, he's like a blues singer, and there's a, boo-ba-doo-be-dee, boo-ba-doo-be-up, boo-ba-doo-be-dee-bo-dee-bo-dee-dum, ee-doo-dee-ba-doo-ba-dum-doo-da, ee-ba-da-ba-ya-da-ba-ba-ba-bo-be-ee-da-ba-ba-ba, re-up, dee-doo-doo, whatever. It's divided into basically 3 parts, just like the lyrics of the blues.
Right. So there is still that redeeming fact of the lyrics dictating to some degrees some of the feeling you're going to have for how you're going to approach improvisation on a subconscious level, of course.
Yeah, but then also, I think just from having, people grew up with these songs on the radio and hearing singers do them, so it wasn't like something that they were necessarily studying for. That's the thing. It was just a natural part of life.
Right, but for younger players, certainly, or anyone learning a tune that's not part of the contemporary vernacular, or that's something from 60, 70, 80 years ago, that requires a different type of approach, because you're not hearing it on the radio, and certainly not hearing it on TV or
Of course, you do have now. The fantastic thing about YouTube and all these things is if you want to know the original version done by Connie Boswell in 1930, whatever,
Right.
you can get that version of it where, I mean, we used to have to like just find who has that record, who has that kind of record collection that goes back that far. And when you hear a great improviser playing a standard, you can feel how they do know the lyric. Even when you listen to something as complex as Charlie Parker's Embraceable You or Just Friends, you can feel that somewhere in there you could actually sing the melody on top of it. And he could feel the melody. You can, when you sing the melody on top of it,
it's so present.
then you feel how he was feeling it.
Right.
I find singing solos to be just as valid or more helpful than even just transcribing and learning to play them on the instrument. I think sometimes transcribing and learning something, getting it under your fingers is very good. But I feel it's even more important to sing because you get the visceral contact with the music and you hear where the great player who's improvising really was improvising around the melody, no matter how complex it gets. To illustrate this, I'm going to sing along with Charlie Parker's Just Friends.
So, Bob, that's a nice example of a short segment of the great Bird solo on Just Friends, and how just learning to really sing along with the recording can help you understand the flow of the lines, the harmonic implications, and set it up so that when you learn it really well, that going to your horn to try to then really play it on your horn becomes second nature.
Yeah, and maybe even not playing that, but playing something, really, yeah, it helps to play it. But, I would say start with Lester Young and Miles and things that are less noted. This is a more advanced
It's absolutely
example. Now, the other thing you want to do with it is to be able to sing the song, which we didn't do. I'd like to do it one more time and just sing an example of singing the melody and the lyric while Bird plays that section. So that's the other thing you do with it. I mean, even before you copy the solo itself.
Wow. So you actually, while he's improvising over that, or whoever you're copying, you're actually going to just sing the melody straight with the lyrics.
You're singing the melody straight with the lyrics. Now, this is very good with piano trio records, too. Find yourself playing with Bud Powell, Bill Evans, sing the lyrics over it. And I suggest also snapping, clapping, or tapping the pocket, while you do it. The pocket being
little
one,
pocket.
Two, there's my pocket. 1, 2, just friends, lovers no more. Well, also singing-wise, you should be able to do this by yourself.
Right.
Just friends, lovers no more. Just friends, not like before.
Right.
And you phrase it your own way. To think of what we've been and not to kiss again. Seems like pretending it isn't the ending. And even sometimes don't even sing it. Just phrase the words that say it. Two friends drifting apart. Two friends. One broken heart.
And Dexter Gordon used to do this often in introducing tunes, especially ballads. I remember, of course, he was very famous. One of the tunes he did this quite a bit with was Polka Dots and Moonbeams.
Right. Okay.
And he would sort of Sprechstimme, talking the words, and it set up the tune in such a beautiful way.
Yeah, he would do that.
Yeah, but it also gives reverence. It also pays homage to the lyricist, which, you know, as an instrumentalist, if you're not going to actually sing it, if you're going to play it, it also adds a little bit to the presentation, I think, as well.
I think it does.
It does. Now, I'm going to ask you, this is something that we hadn't talked about, but and I specifically held it back because I want to do a thing called firing line. Now, you see this a lot on sports talk shows, where I'm going to name a person, name a player, and these are all saxophone players, and I want you to give me a one sentence description of what this person means to you, or the playing, or, you know, how you would describe this person best in one sentence. Okay, it's not easy. All right, so let's first try Jackie McLean.
The connection with Freddie Red. Beautiful time feeling. Tenor playing on alto. And a lot of heart.
Hank Mobley.
Very lyrical, bordering on cliched, but somehow transcends the cliches and makes them musical. Where a lot of people play the same vocabulary, he tends to make the vocabulary into ideas.
Cannonball.
Some people inspire you but don't necessarily influence you. When I'd hear Cannonball live, I would go and practice till my fingers bled. I mean, he played the saxophone so well.
Yes.
But his particular approach to eighth note playing, I liked his cleanliness, the clean way he played the horn. But his particular idea and approach to ideas and approach to time didn't affect me the way that, say, Bill Woods, Jackie McLean, Frank Strozier, Lee Konitz did. Joey Mariano.
Okay. Dexter Gordon.
Dexter, just a beautiful, pure romantic. And a lot of feeling, beautiful sound, just all the value, a natural player. And didn't play cliches. Again, like Hank Mobley, it could have been easy to be corny, and he would stride that line, but he never let himself go there.
Yeah.
And swing, very strong swing.
Yeah, the first great bebop tenor player in there.
Yeah,
Yeah. Charles
Bordeaux Gray and Teddy Edwards.
Bordeaux Gray too. Yeah, the LA guys. Charles McPherson.
Oh, I love McPherson. McPherson has his own way of interpreting Bird and Sonny Stitt. I think, you know, he's right in between all of that. I've listened to him and gotten a lot of inspiration from listening to his music, sharing the bandstand with him. I had one of the most memorable nights of my life playing with him and Ira Sullivan one night in Baltimore, a place called the Bandstand. Also, one thing about Charles, when he found out I had emphysema, boy, he called me right away. I don't know how he found out, but he called. He said, "Are you okay?" You know, he's
that type of person.
He's that type of person, and such a smart cat too. You know, was a great example for me too.
Yes. Lester Young.
Lester Young was as inventive a genius as ever existed in any music. Everything right up to maybe the very last things he did where he was in not very good shape. But
yes.
Anytime I love his middle period too. I think that people give him short shrift and say that, he was only good in the 30s. And
right, after he left Basie.
But he was good afterwards too. He was the most lyrical player that could be.
Johnny Hodges.
Johnny Hodges, I got to know, fortunately.
Really?
Yeah, I used to hang out with Brooks Kerr and so the Ellington Band.
Right.
And this and that. And, he just had the most beautiful again, a person who didn't really influence me, but yet inspired me. I would hear him a lot at the Rainbow Grill with Brooks Kerr, and also he could swing so hard. Everybody knows his lyricism on ballads
Right.
and everything, but you realize how hard he swung too. He really had a beautiful sense of swing and of that language, and
Yes. And he was a virtuoso sax player
he
as
was
a
an
young player.
amazing saxophone
And
player.
he sort of cultivated this other approach as the Ellington sound and band evolved. But he really was a virtuoso saxophone player as a young guy.
Well, he was coming out of Sidney Bechet originally
Yeah.
on soprano, and Sidney Bechet had quite a technique.
Yeah.
And I think he took a lot of that and put that on the alto.
Exactly.
One thing that Benny Carter told me once about Johnny Hodges, we were talking about Charlie Parker, and Benny was crazy about Charlie Parker. Benny said that Charlie Parker was the greatest musician possibly of the 20th century. He said that's how much he was affected by.
Wow.
He said none of us were the same after Charlie Parker. He said Coleman Hawkins changed, I changed. The only one that didn't change was Johnny Hodges.
Yeah.
he still,
Well,
he
that's I guess that's true.
I mean,
It's just interesting statement. Johnny Griffin.
Oh, Johnny Griffin was wonderful. I mean, just, that Chicago feeling. I mean, Johnny Griffin, Gene Ammons. I mean, there's a certain feeling, I guess I get from Ira, because he's originally from Chicago, that even Russ and Roland Kirk had that kind of little bit of that Chicago, Nicky Hill. But Johnny Griffin was amazingly wonderful player, very beautiful technique, beautiful articulation, any tempo, his fast tempos, and a beautiful ballad player. He was a complete master and a good friend of mine too.
Right.
I was fortunate to, a great storyteller. This guy could tell
Need more than
stories.
you?
I think so. Well, he's one of the people that taught me how to tell a story.
Oh, okay.
Well, maybe I'm a good storyteller because I've heard so many good stories from all these wonderful people that told me stories.
Okay. And the final one, again, we know how you feel about Bird. We don't have to go into that. I mean, that's clear and stitt. But we haven't talked about John Coltrane. And what's your, if you had to summarize Coltrane in this firing line approach?
Well, I would say that there's one period, especially of Coltrane, that influenced me quite a bit. I love the period where he was playing with Red Garland and Paul Chambers and often Arthur Taylor and that kind of thing. Sometimes Donald Byrd. That middle period of Coltrane, I think his ballads were so beautiful. I think his approach to ballads actually may be the part of Train that affected me the most. I would say the way he played "Don't Take Your Love From Me," Like Someone in Love on the Lush Life record.
I Want to Talk About You.
I Want to Talk About You, Soul Train.
Yeah.
Even the thing of Invitation as a ballad is beautiful, the way he plays
And I
it.
Love You, that too.
I Love You, but it was medium tempo.
Yeah, medium,
but
but
that
it's
whole
still-
thing,
yeah, it's
that whole trio side with Earl May.
Yeah, and it's often overlooked, I think, Train as a ballad player because of his tremendous technical ability and then the approach to modal music and free playing and all. But that period of, playing, ballads.
Well, that modal aspect of Train and everything, the later period of Train, Jimmy Garrison was a very good friend of mine. And, but Jimmy Garrison was interesting because he also was one of the favorite bass players of the Tristano school. So Jimmy,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he liked that music. He could. So Garrison once said to me, he said, "You're weird, man." He says, "You sound like sometimes." He said, "You sound like a combination of Konitz and Coltrane." He said,
Where does that happen?
It is there.
Yeah.
Because I did get some things with my own sheets of sound.
Yeah.
The double time.
But how would you describe? I mean, besides your preference for that period and all, but how would you if you had to describe Coltrane in a sentence? And I know this is absurd.
One thing is I got a lot of Train through osmosis. I played jam sessions for hours and hours with Brecker, Liebman, Bob Berg, Steve Grossman. So I would get so much of that through them.
Yes.
That actually I would go in the direction of Konitz and Rollins, and I think I was a relief to them just playing the alto and one guy who didn't sound like he was copying Train.
Right. Yeah.
But your question about Train, I think he was a very profound musician. I've even listened to Interstellar Space I can hear what he's trying for there. I think that he, I don't know, he's affected me profoundly. I love Supreme. I spent a whole summer listening to that a lot. Now I don't have the patience sometimes for some of the modal things, but I don't know. I was listening to Wise One a couple of weeks ago, and that's beautiful.
It's fantastic. Yes.
I think he had a great sense of beauty, and he's very sensual, John Coltrane. People don't really hear that so much in him, but I hear a real deep, Coltrane is very sexy.
Yeah. That's an interesting way. I've not heard anybody describe that about him, but thinking about it, and especially in the ballads, that's first of all the sensitivity and the sense of honesty that comes across. That's an interesting way of viewing it. Final question: Desert Island, and you have 5 albums.
Can't do it. I thought about it. I made a list of that 16 records on it.
Give us a few, because your knowledge of recordings is so extensive.
All right. Well,
let's, for our viewers, name some of your favorite albums, regardless of.
I'm leaving Louis Armstrong out of this, but I shouldn't. There's great things that he did. I think Strutting with Some Barbecue, Weatherbird, with Earl Hines, and West End Blues,
the Hot 5.
Yeah, that stuff is really wonderful. Then anything Prez did with Basie. I mean, if I have to pick one period, maybe the Kansas City 7, the small group things, with those things, and Jive at 5 with the big band, and all the stuff in the 30s and early 40s with Basie of Lester. I would say Charlie Parker, pretty much anything by Bird. I don't really have one particular favorite or record of his, but I would definitely put some Charlie Parker in my Desert Island collection. Right. Now, these are just saxophone players we're talking about here.
It could be anybody.
Now, there's other things,
anyone that comes to your mind.
I mean, I would say Clifford and Max with Sonny Rollins, the record that came out as Sonny Rollins plus 4, and also Clifford and Max at Basin Street.
Yes.
I'm not sure which of those I like, the best. Then Bud Powell Trio records, his version of T for Two and April in Paris, and those things. The Miles group, which actually my favorite, if I have to pick one rhythm section that Miles had, my particular favorite is the one with Horace Silver, Percy Heath, and Kenny Clark.
Wow, real early.
Yeah, and I like very much they appear on this Bags Groove record, and especially the 4 tracks with Sonny Rollins, which are 2 takes of But Not For Me, and Sonny's 3 originals, Doxy and Erigen and Oleo. That record really totally changed my life. I must have listened to it 5,000 times. And, that was a big thing. And later on, also the Solar of Miles with the same rhythm section and Davy Schildkraut, playing one of my favorite alto solos.
4.
Yeah. Great solo. And Miles plays great. And that rhythm section, I was fortunate later when I was touring, and I did a tour with Kenny Clark. And Percy Heath, the Heath brothers, came into New Morning in Paris right as we were finishing our gig. They were opening the next night. So Jimmy and Percy came in early and listened to us. And Tootie was there too. But Percy sat in with us. So I got to play, Roland Hanna was on piano. I got to play with 2/3 of that rhythm section. And I got to play Solar with Percy and Kluk.
Yeah.
And I asked Kluk about that rhythm. I said, you do this thing on the stereo, you're just doing this thing with the brushes. I said, that's so brilliant. You don't do anything but this, but you just whoosh.
Yeah.
He said, that was Miles. Miles came in and said, just do that. Don't do nothing else.
How about that?
And, he had so many good ideas, Miles, in that way of like having the piano lay out on Oleo until only playing the bridges.
Interesting.
The attention to detail that was done in that.
Huh.
I love Kenny Dorham with Joe Henderson. Any of those things are are beautiful too. They're like sort of desert islandy.
Yeah, I think. That would be those are one of my favorites. Joe Henderson in the '60s. Those early records of his. I think maybe some of the most worn out LPs that I own.
Yeah, I mean they're amazing records.
They are. They really are.
And I think. Also, Bill Evans really influenced me harmonically, and musically, you know, I think that after Bud, Bill kind of supplied a kind of direction that was an interesting place to go.
And not to interrupt,
And Jackie McLean, the connection with Freddie Red.
that's a that's
And
a
we
great
haven't
album.
talked about vocalists like Lester Young with Billie Holiday. I couldn't go to a desert island without Billie Holiday with Teddy Wilson and Lester Young and that would, unless I was going absolutely alone. If I was bringing a woman, that would have to come with me.
Of today's young musicians.
Sinatra in the wee small hours.
Oh, well,
and
there's
also
your
Sinatra with strings and only the lonely.
well, in the wee small hours, the pathos there.
Okay,
There's your that's.
Now I'll be quiet.
So Bob, you know, there's so many great recordings and so much great music that you shared with us and whatnot, and you continue to be a very inspirational player, but also an inspirational teacher. And I hope for those young players out there, listeners who are thinking about trying to improve their approach to creative jazz improvisation, that you will check out Bob's website, which is on the text accompanying this video, and make contact with him, because he's very available. He's living here in New York, and you know, he's not traveling back to Boston and Florida now. He's here in New York
Or Europe.
Yeah, right.
70 trips in 15 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. But he's here, and I can attest to it as someone who has studied with him and has had students study with him and seen him work. It's a special treat, and his knowledge and his intimate understanding of this music and of the great players who have helped create this, himself included, really is a special deal. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. And Bob, thanks again for sharing your time, man.
Thanks, Kent.
It's always a pleasure, and we hope you'll come back to our next video interview on the Woodwind Legacy series. Thank you.